Colleagues, I'm glad that we have all gathered here this afternoon in Pretoria time. My name is Gallows, nickname Atta. I will be moderating this webinar of today. However, I will just give a brief introduction of our speakers. And I would like to exhort our speakers to understand that whatever information that they may want to put out there, they are free to do so when they commence their presentation. Today, we have two great speakers among us in this webinar. We have Mr. Kelsang Gyatsen, who is the former special envoy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Europe. And also we have Mr. Michael Buckley, who is a Canadian author of the book titled Meltdown in Tibet. Michael also has edited a book which just came out recently with the title, This Fragile Planet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama on Environment. I would also want to add, colleague, that at this time, there are a lot of other participants who are following this webinar or participating in this webinar through Tibet Live TV, which our Facebook page, which is the same chain of network that we've been using in our webinars. Before we go to the first speaker, I would like Mr. Ngodu Doje, the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to South Africa, to give an opening remark. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Doje.
Okay. Okay, Atta, good afternoon, everybody. And Atta, thank you for this introduction. And also, I would like to say deep thanks to Mr. Michael Buckley and Kelsang Gyatsen, to a very eminent
I can't hear.
I can't hear either. He's gone off the air somehow.
Yeah, we know how much issues related to IT, how the work. It looks like he had a disconnection somewhere. Basically, as I said, colleague, Ngodu Doje is the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to South Africa. He works at the office of Tibet here in Pretoria. Ngodu, if we, yes, please, Ngodu, continue.
Yeah, okay. So we are the Office of Tibet and the Tibet Support Group here, one located in Durban and Cape Town Tibet Support Group. We felt that it's important to, so from time to time, remind why the Tibet issue matters in the world, and especially in the context of the global climate change, because Tibet is, I mean, it's so important in the world in terms of fighting the climate change, and also to bringing the peace in the Asian subcontinent, because China and India are now at sort of a loggerhead. Unless one of the two biggest countries in the world, if they do not have a peace each other, it is very difficult to have a peace in the world. So with this sort of a objective in mind, and especially in the context of the Africa, because Africa is also sort of a little bit far from Tibet issue, you know, and they have been dealing with China. Their sort of exchange with China, encounter with China is quite a new, you know, and the Tibetan had actually thousands of experience in dealing with China, and what the African country can learn from Tibet in their sort of exchange, in their dialogue, in their encounters with the Chinese, they can learn a lot from Tibet. So with this objective in mind, we are organizing a number of webinars as much as we can, And so today's workshop, why Tibet Matters, we felt is so important, and that the African audience can learn how they can interact with the Chinese and from the Tibet. So thank you so much, Ada. With this, I would like to stop here.
Thank you so much, Ngodu. Colleagues, it's our tradition whenever we do a webinar to thank the government of India. The reason we do this as a culture practice for us here as a TSG for Tibet is because of the fact that India is still a home for the Tibetans in exile. We understand geopolitical dynamics and the intricacy thereof, and we understand how much is whenever a country stands for another country, it's just a glorious point for us to say we thank you for what you are doing, because it's that good part of humanity that is in exercise and in practice. So it's always our tradition. It's not some sort of political move, but it's a recognition, of course, that so far the government of India has been very kind and very good for the Tibetans in exile, and we continue to table our motion of support to such a government and to encourage them that, Tibet is still in India, while we'll look forward to have conversations that will promote the return of the Tibetans in exile back to their homeland. Colleagues, we're going to Mr. Kelsang, who is going to take us a little bit on geopolitical reflection on the entire Tibetan question. Without further ado, please, Kelsang, you have the platform now to educate us. Thank you.
Thank you, Atta. May I call you Atta, because your real name will be difficult for me to really spell out or
yes,
pronounce
please.
it correctly.
That's why I have made it shorter.
Yeah, thank you, Atta, and thank you also for Michael joining these discussions. And I also greet my colleague, former colleague, Medula. And I would like to thank all the organizers for inviting me to this discussion. And it is important for me to join Atta in expressing our deep appreciation and gratitude to the government of India for the tremendous humanitarian assistance India has rendered to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Tibetans living in India. So thank you very much for everyone. Now coming back to our topic, Tibet matters. I believe Tibet matters because the invasion and occupation of Tibet by the PRC more than 70 years ago is of relevance and significance with regard to international law, universal human rights, the militarization of the Himalaya, and the protection of the natural environment of the highest plateau of the world. These are issues related to peace and stability in that region, wider Asia and the world over. The subsequent enduring resistance and freedom struggle of the Tibetan people are of relevance too, because of its spirit and principles of nonviolence and democracy. These issues are of far-reaching consequences for hundreds of millions of people well beyond Tibet. In other words, its consequences are global, impacting the attitude of people across the world towards nonviolence, democracy, international law, human rights, environment, etc. The issue of Tibet thus raises fundamental questions in safeguarding international law, human rights, the natural environment, and in the promotion of nonviolence and democracy. In my introduction, I will focus on the consequences of the breach of international law resulting from the military invasion and occupation of Tibet by the PRC, and on the means of nonviolent conflict resolution in the 21st century, as advocated by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm very pleased and grateful that the issue of environment on the Tibetan Plateau, which is of global importance, will be covered by Michael Buckley. In the subsequent discussions, I hope to elaborate on the other aspects surrounding the question of Tibet. On the onset of our discussion, it is important that we understand what basic problems the Tibetan people are facing today. The Tibetan people are presently undergoing the most difficult, challenging time of their long history. In fact, the struggle of the Tibetan people is not just a struggle for human rights, basic freedoms, but it is the struggle for the various survival as a people with its own distinct culture, language, religion, and its own distinct civilization and identity. In Tibet, we are witnessing today the return of a climate of intimidation, fear, repression, reminiscent of the days of the Cultural Revolution. Intensified repression and persecution by Chinese authorities are resulting in an unprecedented radicalization of Tibetan resistance. Since 2009, over 150 Tibetans have set themselves on fire in series of drastic protests against unjust Chinese policies in Tibet. In occupied Tibet, there is little room for truth. The use of force and coercion as the principal means to rule and administer Tibet compel Tibetans to lie out of fear and local officials to hide the truth and create false facts in order to suit and please Beijing. As a result, China's treatment of Tibet continues to evade the realities in Tibet, and the Chinese government continues to view Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan distinct culture, language, identity as a threat to the stability of the Chinese rule in Tibet. This results in Tibetans being deprived of true autonomous rights and freedoms, which would enable them to protect and develop their unique and distinct cultural heritage and civilization in their own homeland. The forced transformation and assimilation of Tibet in China's own image is uncovering the existing autonomy in Tibet as empty and meaningless, and is amounting to a form of cultural genocide. This is at the very heart of the problems that Tibetans are facing today. As mentioned before, the Sino-Tibetan conflict is of significant relevance to international law. The invasion and occupation of Tibet has been in clear breach of international law. This is of importance because most governments declare as their official position to uphold international law and to assist in enforcing international law as the most realistic and practical way of securing peace and justice worldwide. The People's Republic of China invaded and annexed Tibet in 1950-51. This unlawful act of aggression against another state changed the political landscape of Inner and East Asia, with severe consequences for peace and stability in that part of the world till to this day. Contrary to the PRC's claim, Tibet was historically never part of China, although in the course of its history, Tibet was subject to various degrees of Mongol, Manchu, and even British Empire's influence. However, this relationship never extended to the degree of Tibet becoming part of China. Tibet was an independent state when the PRC invaded it. This is highly relevant because it brings international legal obligations for both the PRC and all other states today. The PRC has not acquired sovereignty over Tibet since its invasion. Beijing is therefore obligated under international law to end its occupation of Tibet and permit the Tibetans to freely exercise their right to self-determination. Moreover, it is not only the PRC which has obligations. International law stipulates that all governments have the duty not to recognize the illegal annexation of Tibet by China and not to cooperate with or assist Beijing in any way in maintaining its unlawful rule of Tibet. And finally, all governments have the positive duty to help in bringing about an end to the occupation of Tibet and to permit and respect the Tibetan people's right to self-determination. The illegal annexation of Tibet was the first act in gross violation of international law by the newly established PRC as an international actor. Unfortunately, this disregard and breach of international law had no legal or political consequences for China internationally. Consequently, as a result of this failure by the international community to hold China accountable for her unlawful act and to uphold international law with regard to Tibet has emboldened the sense of impunity of successive Chinese leadership and imbued them with an unbridled sense of entitlement. The consequences of this are for all to see today. China today is presenting as an imminent threat to peace and security in the world, and as a threat to the present rule-based liberal international order. Examples of these are plenty when we look at China's aggressive behavior towards India, Bhutan, its expansionism in the South China Sea, its interferences in bullyings of Nepal, Mongolia, and other countries in Southeast Asia, its genocidal policies in Tibet and East Turkestan or Xinjiang, its demolition of democracies and fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong, and its blatant military intimidation of Taiwan. All of this displaying a total disregard for international rules and norms, which are directly related to how the international community has treated and still treats China's invasion and occupation of Tibet. The fact is that the failure by the international community to act on the question of Tibet impacted the PRC's behavior as an international actor. For what has happened with regard to Tibet is the following. The international community tolerated injustice in Tibet to become customary injustice, and customary injustice to become the customary right of the PRC, even though Tibetans never acquiesced to the annexation of their country and never ceased to oppose and resist it till to this day. And this is exactly the lesson that successive Chinese leadership have drawn from its Tibet experience. And this is also precisely the playbook they are now applying to other international disputes within which the PRC is involved. Today, the Chinese Communist Party is determined to change and reshape the international order in the world according to its perception. Towards this goal, the CCP is pursuing an ambitious and well-planned program to exercise influence, to interfere, and to intervene worldwide. In this pursuit, the CCP is building alliances of autocrats around the world, is silencing critics the world over, using its economic and political power as leverage, and is infiltrating and undercutting democratic institutions worldwide with the aim of weakening the opposition and the resistance to its global ambitions. It is therefore high time for the free and democratic world to counter and resist China's corrupting influence the world over. The community of democracies must stand up against a totalitarian China. We need to realize that our own basic rights and freedoms are not secure or safe if there are such powerful dictatorships in other parts of the world. Against this background, it is today a political imperative for members of the international community to engage in a concerted effort to encourage and urge the Chinese leadership to enter into earnest dialogue with the representatives of the Tibetan people with the aim of finding a peaceful, mutually acceptable solution. The policy of the Tibetan leadership in exile on a mutually acceptable solution is straightforward. We are not seeking separation and independence. What we are seeking is genuine self-rule for the Tibetan people within the framework of the constitution of the PRC. Our main concern is to ensure the survival of the Tibetan people with our distinct Buddhist cultural heritage, language, and the natural environment on the Tibetan plateau. This approach is called Umelam, the middle way approach, and was conceived by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the spirit of non-violence, dialogue, and reconciliation. The basic features and guiding thoughts of the Umelam approach of His Holiness the Dalai Lama are a fundamental belief in non-violent approach as the only human, sensible, and intelligent way to overcome clashes of interests and conflicts in the 21st century. B, the pursuit of dialogue and negotiations as the principal means to resolve conflicts, and the exercise of political moderation and restraint in the process of negotiations. C, the conduct of dialogue and negotiations in the spirit of reconciliation, aiming for mutual agreements and mutual benefit, and for solutions with no victor or no vanquished. D, the embrace of the spirit of pluralism and cooperation, and the belief in the political necessity of peaceful coexistence of different cultures, religions, and ethnic groups without separation and segregation in today's highly interconnected and interdependent world. This clearly shows the basic nature of the Tibetan freedom struggle. The nature of the Tibetan freedom struggle is the pursuit of a peaceful resolution of the conflict through non-violence and dialogue in the spirit of reconciliation and compromise. Consequently, it is clear that a negotiated and fair resolution of the Sino-Tibetan conflict would represent a groundbreaking contribution to a global political culture based on non-violence, compassion, and dialogue in a time and world riven and tormented today by a culture of violence and national self-centeredness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelsan, for such great insight. It's like a library that is compressed into a book. I'm very delighted you touched some important point that we may want you to ponder a little bit when we come to Q&A. Micah, please, your presentation. Whatever you want the public to know about you, you may add as well from what I said about you. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Everything okay?
Yes, please. Everything is okay. Yeah.
All right.
Proceed.
Yeah. Basically, I came to Tibet, well, back in 1985 as a traveler and also writing a guidebook, and I didn't know what I was getting into at that time, but I came back many times later to update. And what I noticed over this period of time was that things were changing, which should not change. I mean, you expect the mountains to stay the same, but they weren't. They were changing. And I started noticing these things, and I thought, well, somebody has to talk about this. And I started doing a bit of research, and nobody really was doing that much about it. Except mountaineers knew about this kind of stuff, and the kayakers knew about it because they were firsthand on the rivers. Anyway, I'm going to talk mostly about environment in this talk. And I'm going to be using some photographs, which we will show on the screen. And I'd like to go to the first photograph. We can bring that up. Yeah, this is a photograph of His Holiness under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, Kalachakra. And the Bodhi tree is very important in Buddhism, of course. That's where the Buddha attained enlightenment. This is an offshoot of the original tree. So His Holiness has been in India for more than 60 years. And, you know, India has been a wonderful host to Tibetans. As a matter of fact, I don't think Tibetan Buddhism would have survived so easily if it had not had this basis for being in India. So thank you to the Indian government for providing safe haven. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing up the Dalai Lama is not so much about that Bodhi tree, although that is connected. The reason I'm bringing him up is that in 1989, his was the first Nobel Peace Prize to be awarded on the basis of environment. There's been others awarded since, but his was actually the first. And the reason it was awarded to him on the basis of environment was because... Hello? We good? We good? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please, we can hear you. I guess, yeah, Jingmei will just...
Yeah, okay, I'll carry on. If for some reason you can't hear me or see me, just tell me. Okay, anyway, back in 1989, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on the basis of environmental protection because he proposed turning the whole of Tibet into a large national park or biosphere as a buffer between India and China, and also to protect the wildlife, and because Tibetans really like their environment. They wanted to maintain it the way it was. Of course, this proposal was rejected by China. But think about that. Let's go to the next picture. Can you bring up the next picture there? Here he is in Ladakh. He's looking out at the, towards Tibet. Imagine if Tibet was still on, imagine if Tibet was still under the control of the Dalai Lama. It would be a very, very different situation in terms of environment, because, you know, built into Tibetan Buddhism is great respect for nature, for wildlife, for ecology, and they would not have done all of the things that China has done since to desecrate the place. Next picture. So if you really want to figure out why Tibet matters, this is the only thing you need to look at, this map, because this shows you why Tibet is so important, because Tibet is the headwaters of 10 major river systems that go across Asia, all the way from China in the east to Pakistan in the west. These are major rivers, and without them, the agriculture, the industry, everything that depends on rivers would not function. So this situation does not occur anywhere else in the world, except maybe for parts of Africa where you have the Nile, which is there's some transboundary, that's a transboundary river. But this one, some of these rivers here go through 6 nations. That's definitely transboundary. And China has the upper hand in all cases, or China occupying Tibet has the upper hand. So let's go to the next picture. This pretty much sums it up. If you want to have it in very simple terms from SFT, Tibet's rivers, Asia's lifeline. These rivers depend a lot on the glacial meltwater that's coming from the mountains, and part of it's monsoon water as well. Some are totally dependent on the meltwater, others have mixed rainwater and meltwater. Let's go to the next picture. This is Everest, the highest mountain in the world. This is the north side, this is the Tibetan side of Everest. Mountaineers tell me that climbing Everest is not the same anymore. Because there's more chance of avalanche, there's more chance of loose ice, because the mountain is basically in meltdown mode, which means that things are not as stable as they used to be like 20, 30, 40 years ago. And recently, there's been a discovery of a major deposit of lithium, perhaps maybe 20 kilometers from Everest, which means that the environment's going to get a lot worse. Now, the interesting thing is, next picture, China claims that what's going on with this meltdown in the mountains is to do with the atmosphere, the climate. But what they don't mention is that China is actually driving climate change, because 30% of global CO2 emissions come from China's burning of coal and fossil fuels. And also from India, we have a lot of burning of fossil fuels there. So the thing is that this problem is actually solvable, because a lot of the deposits that land on the Himalayan glaciers, in terms of black soot. Hello? Hello?
Jimmy, please. Yeah, Jimmy, could you please mute all the participants except the speakers and myself, please?
That might be an idea.
Yeah.
Anyway,
continue, Mike. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let's go. Just remind me if I'm not being heard. So this is actually, the black soot, which is the fine particles that come down from the burning of fossil fuels. This is solvable, because if that was to stop, then within 2 months, there'd be no more black soot coming down. And what happens is these black soot particles, they land on the glaciers, they turn the color of the glaciers to gray, which attracts more sun, which causes more meltdown. But of course, you're not going to get China to give up coal overnight, and nor India. It's the same problem. So, but the thing is that there are solutions. It's just that nobody's really pursuing them. Let's go to the next picture. The next picture here. Well, this pretty much sums it up. This is a demonstration in Dharamsala. A lot of people around the world, we're having major problems with climate disasters around the world. We have fires in California. You get fires in the Amazon, but in Tibet, the problem is not the fires, it's the melting that's happening. That's the big problem that's going on. Let's go to the next picture. Now, Tibet has the most powerful rivers in the world, which is why China is interested in the dam capacities of these rivers. This is the Palong Tsangpo, which is the tributary of the Tsangpo. It's not even the Tsangpo, it's a tributary. You can see a kayaker in the middle of that. This is the biggest whitewater in the world, and it's a bit of a challenge for kayakers, of course. Some kayakers have not survived the trip. Let's go to the next picture. What we're looking at here is the Great Bend of the Tsangpo, which holds the greatest hydro potential in the world because of the drop. There's a drop of something like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 meters going down towards India, and the Chinese plan is to put a tunnel through from one side of that bend to the other, put a series of dams along it, and produce a output of 44 gigawatts of some sort, which would be double the size of the Three Gorges Dam. Gives you an idea of what these crazy things these Chinese engineers are getting up to that will make it even worse. Yes?
please, just a couple of seconds. John, please mute yourself. Jigme, if you hear me, please kindly mute John. Mute all participants except the speakers and myself, I repeat. Thank you.
Shut up, you fucking bitch. Shut up, you fucking bitch.
Back in your cage, monkey.
Okay, a little interference there. Okay, so can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
Okay.
Yes,
yeah,
we
good.
hear you.
Okay, so what's happening, what's coming up now in China?
Yes.
Okay, let's go. Okay, so what I was trying to point out here is that China has these gargantuan plans for diverting water, building mega dams, gargantuan dams that have never been built on this scale before. So the worst is yet to come on the rivers of Tibet. It's suffering from damage from climate change, but it's going to get even worse because of their engineering. It's exacerbating the situation. So next picture. There we go. This is what's happening on this transboundary river, which originates in Namdo. Chinese call it Qinghai, and it was not dammed until 1992. As you can now see, there's 11 mega dams on the lower Mekong in Yunnan province, and then these are plans for the rest of it. This is going to destroy the food and water security in both Cambodia and Vietnam, which are heavily dependent on that river. Cambodia for fish, Vietnam for rice. And we're not talking about small dams here. We're talking about, bring up the next picture. Bring up the next picture. This is Shawan Dam. This is 4,200 megawatts, which is the equivalent to 4 nuclear reactors. This is, this is considered a small dam in China, but it's huge. This is bigger than anything in India. This is just one of those dams. There's 11 dams on that river, which is going to destroy that river, and already has destroyed that river. We've had drought 4 years in a row on this river. Next picture. So this is the Kaligandaki going through Nepal. And you can see here the river is feeding the crops, there'd be wheat, barley. And without the river, you're going to have to use artificial fertilizer if you can't get the sediment coming down that river, which dams will block. So it's extremely important that these rivers are working for food and water security of the nations downstream. Actually, Nepal does not depend on rivers sourced in Tibet, but the other ones do, the other nations do. Next picture. So eventually what's going to happen in places like Cambodia and Vietnam and the Mekong Delta is they're going to get pushed out because the crops are going to fail. The fisheries have already failed in Cambodia. So what do these people do? They become climate refugees and they move into cities. This is already happening on a large scale. It's going to happen much, much worse scale in future because of what China is doing to those rivers. Next picture. I just wanted to quickly sum up. We're going to move to some land issues. That was the water. So land issues that are happening. One of the first casualties in Tibet was logging in the eastern part in Kham, the old growth forests. The Tibetans didn't log very much. They used some of the wood for building temples, but the Chinese came in and devastated the old growth forests to make furniture, chopsticks, to the point where there was massive flooding on the Yangtze. Because that was the trees were keeping the water back, and there was massive mudslides and so on. This is one of the casualties on the land, but let's go to some more casualties that's happening. Next picture. I talked about the mountains, but there's another thing of melting that's happening under the ground, permafrost. And this is, what's happening in the rivers is across Asia. It's going to impact the whole of Asia. This is going to impact the entire planet. Because what you're looking at here, this is called the third pole. There's a reason why Tibet is called the third pole. It has the third biggest store of permafrost on the planet outside of the 2 other poles. And when that permafrost thaws, it releases methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas that is about 30 times more powerful than CO2. Can you imagine what's going to happen here if that permafrost starts to thaw out, which eventually is starting to do? Next picture. So here's the grasslands of Tibet. The grasslands of Tibet are vast. If you've been to Tibet, you'll know how big these are. They're carbon stores. This is carbon storage. And these grasslands are being destroyed by Chinese policies, removing the nomads, bringing in mining on a massive scale, which is severely disrupting the grasslands, and just changing the whole ecology. And this will have enormous impact, not just for Asia, but again, the whole planet, because this is carbon storage on a big scale. Next picture. The nomads lived with the grasslands for millennia, 4,000 years. They developed a very delicate system where the yaks interacted with the grass, and then the nomads depended on the yaks. They got milk and cheese and yogurt. They traded that with the farmers for tsampa. They boiled up the tea from yak dung. Everything sort of worked together. But now this whole system has been disrupted because the nomads have been kicked off the grasslands basically to make way for mining, to make way for mega dams. And there's nobody, these are the sentinels, these are the stewards of the grasslands. They've gone pretty much. Only you have some nomads left in Kamanamdo. Next picture. So here is a so-called national park in China. It's in the north in Muli, and it was run by a Chinese coal baron. It's all illegal. He's mining coal, and you can see the snow caps. It's pretty high up. In the foreground, you can see a Tibetan fox looking kind of lost. That's the wildlife, but the rest of it's coal mining. This is what's happening. China says these are national parks, but they're on paper only. Next picture. One of the biggest changes that's happened, and this is the reason you should be very wary in Africa of Chinese infrastructure projects, is the Chinese promised everybody in Tibet a wonderful new life when the train came in. The reverse has happened. You know, the train has been used to desecrate the land for mining. The mining is not possible without the train. The train transports water out of Tibet from groundwater that's sold all over China. That was never possible either. So when they talk about infrastructure and how beneficial it is to the locals, they have to take that with a big grain of salt. Next picture. And this is what's happening to the grasslands. This is actually a natural desert near Samye, but it's indicative of what's happening. The grasslands are being encroached by desert. And part of that is to do with climate change. Temperatures are going up, but a lot of it has to do with Chinese mining and also removal of the nomads and removal of the yaks, which interacted with the grasslands. Next picture. So this is a pretty picture of lithium extraction at a mine. Actually, it's a lake in Qinghai. And these are salt pans where they extract the lithium. You know, Tibet has over 125 valuable minerals that the Chinese are after. It's worth trillions of dollars. And of course, the Tibetans get nothing from this. They get no royalties. They get no hospitals built. They get no schools built. Nothing. All they get is pollution. So lithium is the metal of the moment. It's being rapidly increased, and Tibet is one of the major sources of lithium for the Chinese. They import a lot of lithium, but there's a couple of sources. There's one in Qinghai, there's one in far west Tibet where they can mine it themselves, and big deposit coming up near Everest. Let's continue here. Okay, I'm going to switch to Africa now. We only have a few pictures here. We don't have a lot of time, but this is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. First turbine just started up this week. This dam is a massive thing. It's 5 gigawatts. It's the biggest dam in Africa. Ethiopia says that China has nothing to do with the construction. That is wrong. China has tens of millions of dollars of contracts coming at the end of the project. And China has put in $1.8 billion into the electrical grid for Ethiopia. China is actually involved in 22 African nations for building dams. And I believe that this one will be eclipsed by another dam coming up in Nigeria, which is mostly Chinese built and financed. And the danger here is that these countries will end up being in debt to China, and then they will have to sell off things like what happened in Laos. Laos had to sell off its electrical power grid to China because it defaulted on loans. So when China talks about the Belt and Road, it's actually the bribery and repression initiative, not the Belt and Road. Next picture. This is a very confusing picture. It took me a while to figure out what was going on here, but this is actually a picture taken in Africa. I'm not sure where, but you will never see these two species mixing. Those are tigers and lions. As a matter of fact, tigers do not come from Africa at all. But what's happening here, this is a farm, and it's a farm to raise tigers and lions for traditional Chinese medicine. First of all, they'll be used as bounty hunters to kill, and then the parts, the bones, will be ground up to be used in tonic wines and whatever other ridiculous remedies they use in China. So, you know, tigers do not get together in big groups. They certainly don't get together with lions. So happy year of the tiger. Here's the poor fate of the tigers. These tiger farms are all over Asia, and they're also in Africa. Next picture. You might not think about this, but traditional Chinese medicine, which is one of the byproducts of the Belt and Road, when China does the Belt and Road, they do the infrastructure. They also bring in clinics for traditional Chinese medicine. It's very big. And one of the things they're doing in Africa is they're removing all of the donkeys, the working donkeys I'm talking about. Plus, there's no wild donkeys over there. And they're boiling them down for traditional Chinese medicine. They make some sort of glue out of it. I don't know what they do. But massive numbers of these donkeys. This is very bad for the economy in Africa because many people depend on donkeys for transport. That's the poor man's transport. Last picture coming up. I want to sort of come back to Tibet here. And this is a picture of Kiang, Tibetan wild ass. Now, these should be in a large herd. I've only seen them in groups of 3 or 4. But in previous days, back in the 1940s, they would have been in massive herds in the thousands. And the same as the other grazing animals, the yaks, the antelopes, the gazelles. It was like the Serengeti up there in Tibet before the Chinese came in and pretty much slaughtered them all. Back in the 70s and 80s, these animals entirely disappeared. We're not sure exactly where they went, but the fact-finding missions that came into Tibet in the 70s and 80s, they remarked on the silence of the grasslands. They couldn't hear any animals. They couldn't see any animals. They could hear some birds here and there. So when China talks about national parks that it's set up in Tibet, like 50% of Tibet is national parks, they don't tell you that they slaughtered all the wildlife that goes with those national parks. It's gone. You don't see herds of Kiang anymore. You see 3 or 4 Kiang if you're lucky. I've only seen small groups like this. I've never seen a group. So when they talk, these national parks they're talking about, and this conservation and everything they're talking about, it's all on paper only. Really what they're interested in is exploiting Tibet like every other colonial power and producing, pulling out the minerals, the water wealth, everything else. So I'm going to conclude there. I think I've probably gone on long enough to give you plenty to think about. This is the impact that China is having on Tibet, but it's also talking about the impact that Tibet has on the rest of Asia and the rest of the planet and how important Tibet is. So I hope I haven't talked too long. It's probably gone a little bit over. We did get interrupted, but I'll hand over now.
That's fine, Mike. Thank you so much. I mean, it is what it is. We are used to, until we begin to create our own platform, we will be subjected to,
well,
hacking
try
now and then.
Blue Jeans, I think, would be a little bit safer.
Yeah, we tried Blue Jean, but a couple of times. Administration with Blue Jean is a little bit tricky, but we'll figure out something. So because the webinar, of course, was scheduled just for an hour, what I'm going to do is I will just bring in Kersang. If you could just probably highlight on, you talked about deepening radicalization of Tibetans as a result of the PRC persecution. Probably I may want just to invite you to add more light on that and probably to explain to us some of the severe consequences, both locally and internationally, because we understand how much persecution can really radicalize. And, radicalizations really sometimes have international consequences as well. And then for you, Mike, I was so intrigued with all the display and the photos. I mean, the photos, they speak for themselves what is happening in Tibet, as you rightly put it, and the fact that you always connect it to the African scenario, which is very important for our African audience. You talked about, the discovery of lithium deposit in Tibet. I want you also to reflect on that, as well as to look into Chinese attitude beyond Tibet in terms of mineral resources, bringing the African continent as another experience that you may want to throw light on that, please. Go ahead.
Who's talking first? Kelsang?
Michael, you start.
Is that fine, Mike? We're starting with you, then we end with Kelsang.
Yeah, sure.
Kelsang started. All right.
Well, China's colonial game plan is basically to get a nation in debt. Debt trap. It's like a Trojan horse, right? It's the Chinese horse this time. And once they default on the loans, they say, okay, well, yeah, just give us that copper mine over there, or give us that cobalt mine, whatever. And in the case of Laos, we've seen it where they had to forfeit their electrical grid because they defaulted on payments for dams. And in Sri Lanka, they had to give over a port because they defaulted on some loans there. So China gets this, they were just waiting for them to make a mistake like that. And so, of course, in Africa, you've got the situation where China is desperate for some of the minerals you have there, like cobalt in the DRC, the Congo. It's the biggest producer of cobalt in the world, I believe. And that is used in EV, in electrical vehicles. So, and also, so there are minerals and so on that China is after, and it cannot get them locally. So it has to go overseas to get them. And Africa is one of the targets, of course. So when they're talking about infrastructure to help Africa, I don't think they're talking about infrastructure to help Africa. They're talking about infrastructure to help themselves, because they want to build a train or whatever, so they can export that stuff back to China. That is the game plan. They're not being benevolent in this Belt and Road thing. It's a bit of a misnomer. Should be renamed. But they're putting trillions of dollars into the thing, and they want something back, of course. So in Myanmar, I think there was a problem where the military government defaulted on something, so they had to give them copper. They had to give them a copper mine as a repayment, or maybe jade or something like this. They have to pay them back in goods if they default. It's one military talking to another. Very bad situation. And then what's happening in Cambodia, you've got a dictator, Hun Sen, who's in bed with China, and he'll give them anything they want in repayment for him, China propping up their useless regime. So Cambodia stands up for China at ASEAN meetings and, does anything China wants them to do. So there's ways that they want repayment for what they put in. It's not an equal thing, that in terms of royalties and so on that, you might get, well, they have to pay, they have to do this when they go to Chile. They're much smarter in Chile, right? They say, no, we want royalties. We want you to build schools. We want you to build hospitals. And suddenly China's building schools and hospitals. Where did that come from? They never did that in Tibet. They have to pay royalties. It depends how the country is dealing with, with China. If they put the rules down, if they put their feet down, then they get a good deal. But otherwise, they're not getting a good deal. I don't know if that answers your question, but part of it. Be wary of China. That's the answer. I can't.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, please proceed.
Shall I proceed, Atta?
Yes, please.
Yes. When I spoke about the radicalization of Tibetan recently, I think people should know that in 2008, before the Summer Olympic Games in Beijing, there was a large demonstrations in Tibet throughout the Tibetan plateau. And so in combination with the attention that was being paid to the Olympic Games of 2008 in Beijing, there has been a lot of interest by the world and media on the situation inside Tibet. And since these demonstrations in 2008, the Chinese authorities in Tibet have intensified repression inside Tibet. And And actually, at that time, the Chinese Communist Party secretary in Tibet, that this is the most powerful man inside Tibet, was the party secretary that later, introduced in Eastern Turkestan or Xinjiang the surveillance system and repression and concentration and the camps that were over 1 million of Uyghurs are being held. So during that time, the Chinese Communist Party secretary used Tibet as a laboratory for his, in order to enhance the repression and surveillance of the population. And so, sorry, there was a call. So, in other words, after 2008, the repression inside Tibet, the surveillance and the control inside Tibet was so tight that there was hardly any possibility for people coming together and holding, staging demonstration and so on. So as a result of that situation, there has been different forms of solo demonstration where one single person or two try to protest and stage demonstrations. And later on, because of the increased repression, intensified repression, and because of the worsening, dramatically worsening repressive policies of the Chinese government, Tibetans inside Tibet felt compelled to resort to this very drastic protest of self-immolation. But I would like to draw the attention of the listener to the fact, despite all the sense of frustration and despair that these people must have felt, they still tried not to harm any Chinese, not to harm, kill any Chinese, but to resort this kind of drastic protest with the aim of drawing the attention to the situation inside Tibet and hoping thus to bring about a change of the Chinese policies with regard to Tibet. So it is obvious that these over 150 people in that mood and mindset still try to remain in their protest, strict, non-violent. Now, this kind of self-immolation is very, completely new to the Tibetan culture, Tibetan attitude. I have never heard of any Tibetans, setting himself on fire to protest politically. So I think this is one fact that people should know. And then second fact is among those over 150 people, Tibetans, who resorted to this drastic protest, there are people from every walk of life, students, elderly people, monks, nuns, mother, father, nomads, and herders, and so on. So this wide range of people from every walk of life.
I am not sure where that noise is coming again. Are you hearing some noise there?
Yes, no, yet now I don't hear any noise.
All right, continue please, because the people who are participating now on this platform beside the Facebook are individuals that I know personally, and they are not allowed, and no one is a stranger here. Please continue.
Yes, okay, so therefore, this shows the how widespread the sense of frustration, sense of despair among Tibetans inside Tibet are. And I think so therefore what we see inside Tibet is it's a very unfortunate slide towards a catastrophe, because on the one side we have increased repression by the Chinese authorities on all spheres of life of Tibetans. On the other side, we have radicalization of Tibetan resistance, even though the radicalization of Tibetans resistance does not go to the extent of resisting with arms or with violence against Chinese occupation forces or Chinese people. But still, this resort to these drastic forms of protest must be called a radicalization of Tibetan resistance.
Thank you, Kesang. It's been a hectic day. Ngodu, what do you think? Should you want to give a closing remark, or I should provoke our two speakers more, because I had wanted them to give an advice that they may want to give related to their different topic to various African states in terms of the continuous Chinese penetration in Africa. What do you think, Ngodu? Unmute yourself, please.
Let them how they deal with the African, you know.
All right. So Mike and Kesam, please, just in 1 minute, we want you to just coin an advice that you may want to advise African state regarding the various subject matter of today. If you don't mind, I pull your legs further, please.
Okay, shall I proceed?
Yes, proceed. Yeah.
Okay, I have not set foot in Africa. I've only been to the northern parts, Morocco, Egypt. But I will tell you one thing: where China treads and the infrastructure follows, the environmental damage is going to be immense, because they do not care about environment whatsoever. They're interested in one thing: money, exploitation, and they leave a huge trail of disaster wherever they go. And you only have to look at Tibet. That's one place. But I mean, look at also Myanmar. Look at Cambodia. The trail of destruction. I mean, they've taken out a lot of hardwood from Cambodia. They've taken out a lot of teak from Burma. And they don't repay any. They don't give anything back. They're just only interested in exploitation. So I think it would be no different in Africa. That's their objective. So that's what I think the thing to take away from this is they're only interested in exploiting. They're not interested in saving the environment or even, doing impact assessments or anything. That's why they get the contracts for the dams, because the Western countries would not dare construct some of these dams because of the environmental impacts. They back away. But China go in there like a dirty shirt. They don't care.
Kesang?
Hello, do you hear me? No, I think.
Yes, please.
No, I have no real, particular suggestions to African brothers and sisters. But what I can say to you as a Tibetan with regard to China and dealing with China, I think, we should have no illusions about China. And when China invaded Tibet, they called it liberation. When they destroyed the authentic old Tibetan system, they call it democratization. When they, forcefully remove all the nomads in Tibet, they call it, modernization, and so on. So China is, the Chinese government is expert in, giving very beautiful names to their real, harsh policies. So I think, you should look at the DNA of the Chinese Communist Party. This is a totalitarian movement. This is a very culturally chauvinistic, racially racistic movement. So in the case of Tibet, they first, actually in 1955, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was in Beijing and met with the Mao Zedong, on the last day of the departure of His Holiness from Beijing to Tibet, there was a meeting between His Holiness and Mao Zedong and 2 or 3 generals of the People's Liberation Army. So Mao told to His Holiness, I will be sending these generals to Tibet to help and assist you. And if they do not act as you wishes, you just write me and I will recall them back. I withdraw them from Tibet. But we all know what happened. His Holiness wrote several times to Mao Zedong in 1956, 57. So the answer was an increased presence of People's Liberation Army, and finally leading to 1959, March 10th, where the Tibetan people revolted against the Chinese occupation forces, and which led to the flight of His Holiness to the Dalai Lama. So don't have any illusions about China. This is the Chinese Communist Party is a totalitarian and dictatorial movement that does not respect any other forms of existence and way of life. Their whole aim and drive is to have total control of all other movements, all other countries and other governments, because it is the nature of totalitarian system to feel everything that is different from its own system, because a more free, more open society is always a threat to the rule of a dictatorial and totalitarian system. So therefore, I think, our African brothers and sisters need to look at the Chinese encroachment and interventions in Africa with a clear eye.
Thank you, Kelsang. That was very insightful. Apologies again for the hackers and the bombers. And somebody was just reminding me again that, remember, Zoom is owned by the Chinese. We used to this by now. Even at university, sometimes there are sensitive topics that when we gather to talk about, and you have these hackers and they miss everything. And one of the professors, I remember a statement, I quote him, he always tells us, until we create our own platform, then we are not safe. Because when we create our own platform, we definitely will know, how to scrutinize people. Because basically, since these webinars are always followed online via Tibettv Facebook page live, sometimes I only give the link to the people I know. But sometimes when you give the link, then other people will want to give it to somebody else, who gives it to somebody, who gives it to somebody, just this endless chain of network. And then we find ourselves. But I guess it's been very insightful. I see Tupten, you've been nodding your head. Do you want to have a 1-minute comment, my friend?
Oh, I just said Rashid Dilek, my regard from former special envoy Mr. Kesan Janzela and Michael and his representative, His Holiness and Petria Kungumutula. And today's topic is very, very interesting. Galo, you have really chosen very good speakers, and topic unfortunately applied for Tibet as a political matter, as a freedom struggle. We Tibetan, we are within. And what has been very interesting is the perspective of Michael as from outsider. Initially, he was just trying to trick in Tibet and read some guidebooks, and he fell into the Tibetan political harsh reality under colonial domination. And that is very interesting, his itinerary. And also today, regularly, we just highlight a different level of international stage Tibetan plight. Nowadays, the Chinese government under Xi Jinping, they just take every advantage from the international institution, and they try to walk away when comes to its legal obligation, also to respect the human rights, even to be on a good term and with his own Chinese constitution, which literally, textually, there are some written guarantees, but never applied in the reality. So we have to continue our struggle anyway, in spite of the difficulties. Sometimes what happens last night in the case of the Russian military operation against its immediate neighbor, sovereign and free and independent nation. So don't forget us. Let's just remind us that China is the first ally of that kind of the political dictator who just want to restore another Union Soviet, So China's mindset when they come to African continent is with some kind of attitude to conquer maximum the space and minerals, and also at the same time to colonize. So that is, I think, we have to keep in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tupten. I'm sure we've done so many webinars, but today has been a different day. I guess also is because the profile of the speakers is very heavy. With the recent edited book that Mike has edited, The Fragile Planet, and his own book that he published. I'm sure basically wherever Mike is going, then we have to experience this phenomenon of unwelcome guests penetrating and hacking our system. Mike Godu can confirm with me that I think it's because we are having you as one of the high profile outsider that then the enemies.
I think you have to beef up your security systems, because I can hack quite a lot myself, but I have good security. You know, like it's very hard to get past my systems.
Yeah, they will definitely do that. Godu, please, a closing remark.
Okay. Okay, Atta, thank you for moderating. And I just want to say a few words. I think this is, sorry for this sort of a disruption, but I think we have to, this reality of online webinar, we have to sometimes face. And also we have been a little bit lax in sharing the webinars link on the Facebook and as well as on the poster. I think maybe anybody could copy that and they can access this. So this is one lesson for us anyway. And thank you, first of all, Michael and Kesanla, for very insightful presentation and experience you share with all of us. And what I can say is that one of the very important the takeaway from this presentation, Michael's presentation, that Chinese infrastructure development, wherever it goes, and most importantly in Africa, now this is buzzword, you know, Africa, Chinese investment, it follows with complete disregard to the environment in sort of a ecological the impact. So it follows with a lot of distraction, ecological distraction. And that is our African brother and sister must keep in mind that the Chinese investment comes with a heavy price, either in the debt trap or infrastructure in terms of bringing in the Chinese cheap labor, as well as leading to the complete sort of environmental destruction of that locality. I think that is the very one takeaway we can from the Michael's presentation. And also the Keson's last presentation is very important that the African brother and sister and the government should not have any illusion with dealing with the Chinese, and they must identify and have a full understanding of the Chinese Communist Party's DNA, what it is meant for, and what is their real core nature, you know. So with this understanding, they have to deal with the Chinese. They have to have a very heavy, sort of a very strong bargaining power while dealing with the Chinese. Otherwise, they will, if they have some sort of a very, very magnanimous and sort of a very feel good factor sort of a idea about the Chinese, they will be in a big trouble like Tibet. It had sort of a influenced by our religious sort of a everybody's good, you know, you be compassionate, and at the end, well, where we landed up, you know. So finally, of course, thanks for the government of India, we had a place to put our feet, you know, and then suddenly slowly revive the Tibetan culture. And so that is great, you know, government of India. I mean, inspired India at that time. In 1959 was just out of the partition, and it was a very poor country, you know. But in spite of that, they actually accommodated Tibetans and provided whatever they could. So today we are able to, we can say that fairly confidently that at least we have been able to revive the Tibetan culture heritage, including the Buddhism. And also, thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you so much, all the participants, for joining us. and please share your whatever you have heard with your friend circles. Yeah. Okay, Atta, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Godupla. Thank you, colleagues. Thanks to our presenters. Participant, please forgive us for not allowing you to ask some of the bullet questions that we know you prepared to ask for this webinar. We will have an occasion where all questions will be considered next time. Ladies and gentlemen, we are ending the webinar now. Have a great day ahead of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.